The drive from the State Corrections Facility in Montpelier took 2 hours and 40 minutes. I know because I counted every mile. I had a paper bag on my lap with everything I owned in the world. A wallet with $63, a flip phone the prison chaplain had donated to a release fund, my father's watch that they'd kept in a lockbox for 5 years and 8 months, and a letter from the State Attorney General's office that said, in the dry language of government documents, that my conviction had been vacated, that new forensic evidence had established my innocence, and that the state of Vermont regretted the error. 5 years and 8 months. My wife's funeral. My son growing up without me. My name dragged through every diner and feed store and church parking lot in a county where my grandfather had broken ground in 1951. All of it, and the state of Vermont regretted the error. The cab driver didn't ask why I'd been at a correctional facility. He was a young man, maybe 25, and he kept his eyes on the road and the radio low, and I was grateful for both. I sat in the back seat watching Vermont roll past the window, the green hills. I'd looked at every morning of my life until the morning. They put me in handcuffs, and I tried to remember how to feel something other than numb. I should explain what happened, because nothing that comes after makes sense without it. My name is not important. What is important is that I built something. My grandfather started the farm. My father expanded it. I turned a modest dairy operation into one of the most recognized small-batch cheese producers in New England. By the time I was in my late 50s, we had 42 acres in Lamoille County, a production facility that my father would not have recognized, contracts with specialty grocers in 6 states, and a property that 3 separate appraisers had valued at just over $2.4 million. I also had a brother, 3 years younger than me, Raymond. Raymond had worked the farm on and off over the years, but never with the kind of commitment that the land demanded. He had a talent for showing up when things were going well and disappearing when they weren't. I loved him anyway. He was my brother. You love people in spite of what they are, not because of it. That's what my father always said, and I believed it for a long time. What I did not know, what I could not have imagined, was that Raymond had been quietly drowning in debt for years. Bad investments, a second mortgage on his house in Burlington that his wife Sandra knew nothing about, loans from people who did not use courts to collect. What I also did not know was that Raymond had spent a considerable amount of time with our farm's bookkeeper, a man who had worked for us for 11 years, quietly building a paper trail, invoices that looked like mine, transfers that appeared to originate from my accounts. A story of embezzlement, constructed over 18 months, that was designed to look like I had been stealing from my own company. When the state police came to the farm on a Tuesday morning in October, I thought it was a mistake. I said that clearly and repeatedly. My wife Carol stood at the kitchen door with her hand over her mouth while they read me my rights. And the last thing I saw before the cruiser pulled out of the driveway was my son, Tyler, standing in the field in his work boots, watching me go. He was 23 years old. He had just started to take a real role in running the operation. He had his whole life mapped out on that land. The trial took 8 months. My attorney was competent but underfunded, and the prosecution had a tidy story with clean documents and a cooperating witness, the bookkeeper, who had made a deal. I testified. Carol testified. Tyler testified. None of it mattered. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. I won't describe what the first weeks in a correctional facility feel like for a man who has never been in trouble in his life. I'll only say that I understood very quickly that I had a choice to make about what kind of person I was going to be when I got out. I chose to be someone who got out. For the first 8 months, Carol drove up to see me every other Sunday. She looked smaller each time, somehow, like the situation was compressing her. I told her not to worry. I told her we would fight the conviction. I told her to take care of herself. Then the visits stopped. Raymond told me, in a letter, that Carol had asked him to pass along the message that she needed space, that the stress was affecting her health, that she would write when she was ready. She never wrote. What I learned later, much later, was that Carol had been diagnosed with pancreatic cancer 3 months after my conviction. Stage 3. Raymond knew. Sandra knew. They had visited her in the hospital, sat beside her bed, held her hand while she died. They told everyone at the funeral that I had been informed and had chosen not to respond. They told my son Tyler, who was 24 years old and burying his mother, that his father had been notified and had gone silent. I did not know Carol was sick. I did not know she had died. I did not know any of it until 2 years into my sentence, when a new cellmate with a connection to the outside world pulled up an old obituary on a contraband phone and handed it to me without saying a word. I will not describe that night either. By the time the Innocence Project attorney found the discrepancy in the bookkeeper's testimony, a date that didn't match a phone record that led to a financial account that led, eventually, to Raymond, I had been incarcerated for 4 years and 11 months. The investigation took another 9 months. The exoneration came quickly after that. Raymond had already relocated to Florida by the time the new evidence emerged. He left Sandra behind to manage things. He left my son behind to manage things too, which is a detail I will return to. So there I was, in the back of a cab on Route 15, with $63 and my father's watch and a letter from the government, going home. I had called the farm from the prison chaplain's desk on the morning of my release. No one answered. I called twice more from a payphone at the bus station in Montpelier. Same result. I told myself the lines were busy. I told myself I would be there in 2 hours and 40 minutes. The cab turned down the county road I had driven 10,000 times in my life. The maples along the fence line were in full color. It was late September. And Vermont was doing what Vermont does in late September, burning every shade of red and orange it possessed. My father had planted those maples. I used to tell Carol that if we ever had to sell, I would miss those maples more than the house. The cab stopped at the gate. I got out and paid the driver. I stood at the gate for a moment and looked at what used to be mine. The fencing on the east side of the property needed repair. 3 sections were sagging where the posts had gone soft. My father would have replaced them the same week he noticed. I noticed them now and felt something tighten in my chest. I walked up the drive. The production facility looked operational. The parking area had a truck I didn't recognize, newer, a lease plate. The farmhouse needed paint on the south-facing trim, which was exactly the kind of thing that got ignored by someone who didn't own the place in their heart. You can always tell the difference between a person who owns something and a person who is merely occupying it. The occupier lets the small things slide. I didn't go to the house first. I don't know why. Something pulled me toward the barn. The barn had been my grandfather's original structure, added onto twice, still standing because he had built it to outlast everything. I pushed open the side door and stood in the cool, dark interior for a moment, letting my eyes adjust. There was a young man stacking feed bags in the far corner. Heavy canvas bags, 50 pounds each, and he was moving them efficiently in the way of someone who had done the same task many hundreds of times. He had his back to me. He was wearing a gray thermal shirt and work pants, and there was something about the way he moved the set of his shoulders, the way he tilted his head slightly when he lifted that hit me so hard I had to put my hand on the doorframe. I said his name. He turned around. He looked at me the way you look at a stranger. Polite, neutral, slightly cautious. He was holding a 50-pound bag like it weighed nothing, and he looked at me and waited to see what I wanted. My son was 29 years old, and he did not know who I was. I understand why. I had gone in at 56 with good color and the build of a man who worked with his hands. I was 62 now, and I had not been a man who worked with his hands for 5 years and 8 months. I was thinner. I was grayer. I was wearing clothes that didn't fit because they were the same clothes I'd worn into the facility, and no amount of pressing disguised what they were. I said, "Tyler, it's me." He set the bag down, slowly. He stared at me for a long time. I watched him doing what you do when reality doesn't match the story you've been told. He had been told his father was a thief. He had been told his father had gone silent when his mother was dying. He had been told, implicitly or explicitly, that I was not coming back. "Dad," he said. Not a question, not a welcome, just a word that he needed to say out loud to see how it felt. "Yeah," I said. He sat down on a feed bag. Just sat straight down like his legs had made a decision without consulting him. I walked over and sat down too, and we were quiet for a while, in the way that men are quiet when there is too much to say and no good place to start. When did you get out? He said. This morning. He nodded slowly. They overturned it, I said. The conviction. New evidence. Raymond set the whole thing up, Tyler. The bookkeeper was working for him. He nodded again. Like this was not entirely a surprise. Like some part of him had always suspected a version of this story, but had not had permission to believe it. He still has everything, Tyler said. Sandra does. He gave her power of attorney before he left for Florida. What do you mean he left? About 8 months ago. Right around when Tyler stopped. There was an investigation. Someone from the state called. Raymond was gone 3 days later. Sandra stayed. And you're here. I'm here. I looked around the barn where I had taught my son to feed calves, the barn where my father had taught me the same thing. I looked at my son's hands red from the cold, calloused in the specific places that told me he had been doing physical labor every day for years. Tyler, I said, this is your property. You understand that. This is your inheritance. He looked at me with an expression I hadn't seen on his face since he was a teenager, when he was trying to decide whether to believe something I was telling him. Sandra has documents, he said. What kind of documents? He was quiet for a moment. A will. From you, dated before you went to prison, leaving everything to Raymond in trust, to be managed until I turned 35. I felt very still. That's not my will, I said. I know, he said. I think I always knew, but he stopped again. But what? He looked up at the barn ceiling. He was quiet for long enough that I began to understand the shape of what he was going to say before he said it. Emma, he said. I didn't know who Emma was. My daughter? He said. She's 9. I did the math and felt a complicated rush of something, joy at the existence of a grandchild I hadn't known about, grief at the years I'd missed, anger at what had been taken from me before I could even say that word. Granddaughter. Sandra has been. Tyler pressed his lips together. Emma has a heart condition. Not serious. The doctors say it won't need surgery, but she takes medication every day and she needs the specialist in Burlington every 4 months. Sandra put Emma on her insurance 2 years ago when I couldn't afford. He stopped. When things got tight, I waited. Sandra told me that if I cause any problems, if I contact a lawyer, if I try to challenge anything, she pulls Emma off the insurance. She said the specialist won't see her without coverage. She said he stopped one more time, and this time, I could see what it cost him. She said she'd make sure Emma's school file reflected some behavioral issues that would affect her eligibility for the gifted program she just got into. I sat with that for a moment. 9 years old. My granddaughter was 9 years old, and she had a heart condition, and a woman was using that 9-year-old's medical access as a lever to keep my son in a barn stacking feed bags on property worth $2.4 million. How long has this been going on? I said. The insurance thing, about 2 years. The rest of it, Tyler, working here without wages, just room and board. How long, Tyler? Since Mom died, he said quietly. Raymond came to me right after the funeral and said that if I wanted to stay on the property, this was the arrangement. I had nowhere to go. Emma was a baby. Her mom, he shook his head. Emma's mom left when Emma was 2. It was just me and Emma, and I didn't have options, Dad. I stood up. I am 62 years old, and I have not been a man given to dramatic gestures. My father was the same way. We are men who move slowly and think carefully and act with intention. That is the way we were raised, and it served me reasonably well until it didn't. I walked out of the barn. The September air hit me, and I stood in the yard of my family's property, and I looked at the farmhouse where Sandra was, presumably inside, doing whatever Sandra did on a Tuesday afternoon while my son stacked bags in a barn for know-how. Wages. Tyler came out behind me. Dad, he said. She'll pull the insurance. She'll do it. She won't, I said. You don't know her. I know something she doesn't know yet, I said. I took out the flip phone the chaplain had given me. I had one number memorized. I had memorized it 3 years ago when I heard the name of the attorney from the Innocence Project, the one who had eventually found the discrepancy in the bookkeeper's testimony. Her name was Margaret, and she had given me her personal cell number the day before my release and told me to call if I needed anything. I called it now. She answered on the second ring. I told her where I was. I told her about Sandra, about the forged will, about the power of attorney. I told her about Emma and the insurance and the specialist in Burlington. Margaret was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Don't go inside that house yet. Don't confront her. Can you give me 45 minutes?" I said I could. I walked the fence line with my son for 45 minutes. We talked about his mother. Tyler told me about her last weeks, that she had been peaceful, that the hospice nurses had been kind, that she had talked about me in the final days, that she had made Tyler promise not to believe the things Raymond had told him about why I hadn't responded to the news of her illness. "She said you didn't know," Tyler said. "She said she believed that. She said Raymond had lied to both of you, and she was sorry she hadn't found a way to get word to you herself." I had to stop walking for a moment. My wife had died believing I had been lied to. She had died protecting my reputation to our son with her last breath, while Raymond sat beside her bed playing the role of grieving brother-in-law. She had died without me there because Raymond needed me in prison, needed me cut off and discredited and buried in a cell where I couldn't see what he was doing to everything we had built. I have been asked since then whether I felt rage. The honest answer is that rage is not a big enough word, and it is also not entirely the right word. What I felt standing on that fence line was something more like clarity. Everything that had been blurry for years, the why, the shape of what had been done to me, snapped into focus, and with that focus came a kind of cold, absolute certainty about what came next. Margaret called back in 42 minutes. "I've contacted the insurance commissioner's office," she said. "I've also spoken to a colleague in Burlington who handles estates. Here's what you need to know. The power of attorney Raymond issued is almost certainly invalid because it was executed while forged documents were being used to fraudulently control estate assets. The will is the same. We can file an emergency injunction this afternoon." In the meantime, I could hear her clicking through something on a keyboard. "Your granddaughter's specialist." I called the clinic directly. "They have your granddaughter's file." I explained the situation, and they have agreed that in the event of an insurance disruption, they will continue care and we will sort the billing through the estate recovery process. Emma's medical care is not going anywhere. I breathed. "Thank you," I said. "There's one more thing," Margaret said. "Raymond was served with a criminal fraud complaint in Florida this morning. I've been sitting on it waiting for your release. He won't be going anywhere. Sandra is likely to be served as a co-conspirator before the end of the week." I said, "I'm going to go inside now." "That's your house," she said. "You have every right." Tyler was standing beside me. He had heard my side of the conversation, and he was looking at me with an expression. I recognized the look of a young man recalculating the world. "Emma's covered," I said. "Her specialist is covered, regardless of what happens with the insurance. You understand?" He stared at me. "The leverage is gone," I said. "Whatever Sandra told you she could do, she can't do it anymore." He sat down on the fence rail. Not because his legs gave out this time, but deliberately, the way you sit when you need a moment to absorb something good. "How did you—" "I made a phone call," I said. "That's all it took. One phone call. That's what she was afraid of. That's why she needed you to believe you couldn't make it." We stood there together for a moment in the September light, on the fence my grandfather had built, on the land my father had loved, on the property I had spent my life making into something worth handing down. The maples were doing their October preview, a few early leaves gone red at the edges, and somewhere in the production facility, a piece of equipment was running with the low hum I had heard every day for 30 years. "Let's go inside," I said. Sandra opened the door before we reached the porch. She must have seen us from a window. She was a composed woman, Sandra the First, had always thought, in the years before everything went wrong. She had a kind of practiced pleasantness that worked fine in social situations and revealed nothing about what was underneath. What was underneath was visible now. She looked at me the way you look at something you were certain was gone that has just reappeared in your doorway. "You're out," she said. "I'm out," I said. "And I'm home." She straightened. "This property is under power of attorney from Raymond. You have no legal—" "The power of attorney is being challenged as of approximately an hour ago," I said. "There's an emergency injunction being filed in Burlington right now. The forged will is part of the same complaint. Raymond was served with a criminal fraud filing in Florida this morning." I paused. And Emma's specialist has been notified that her care continues regardless of what you do with the insurance. That particular card has been played out, Sandra. She went very still. There are moments in your life when you can see a person recalculate their entire situation in real time. I watched it happen. I watched Sandra go through denial, then reconsideration, then a kind of grim recognition. She was not a stupid woman. She had been running a very effective operation for several years, and she knew immediately when the operation was over. "You'll want to make arrangements," I said. "I'll give you until Friday. I want to be reasonable about this." She looked past me at Tyler. Something moved in her expression. Not regret, exactly, but the complicated look of someone acknowledging a miscalculation. "The documents are in Raymond's office," she said finally. "The second drawer on the left. You'll want the blue folder." She stepped back from the door. I walked into my house. I am not going to pretend that it was easy to walk through those rooms. The furniture was different. Sandra had redecorated in a style that had nothing to do with the people who had actually lived there. Everything was matching and coordinated in the way of a show house, and the effect was to make the place look like strangers lived there, which they did. But the bones were the same. The kitchen window still faced the east field. The stairs still had the same slight creak on the fourth step. My father's rifle, which had hung above the fireplace for 50 years, was still there, though someone had polished the stock until it didn't look right. I sat down at the kitchen table. Tyler stood in the doorway. "Where's Emma?" I said. "School," he said. "She gets home at 3:30. It was 2:45. We sat at the kitchen table, and Tyler made coffee the way I had taught him, 2 scoops too many, strong enough to stand in, the way his grandfather had liked it, and we talked for 45 minutes. He told me things I had missed. He told me about Emma's birth, about the early scare with her heart that had turned out to be manageable, about her personality stubborn and funny and too smart for her own good, he said, just like her grandfather. Just like her grandfather. I heard the school bus at 3:28. I heard small feet on the porch steps. I heard the door. Emma came in the way 9-year-olds come into rooms all at once, already talking, dropping her backpack in the general direction of the hook. She was telling Tyler something about a project before she was fully through the door, and then she stopped because there was a stranger at her kitchen table. She looked at me with her father's eyes. The same cautious assessment, the same slight tilt of the head. Tyler said, "Emma, this is my dad." She looked at Tyler. She looked at me. She was 9 years old, and she was doing the math. She knew her grandfather had been in prison. She knew the story that had been told to her, and she was in the middle of revising it in real time. "The one who got out?" she said. "Yeah," Tyler said. "The one who got out." She thought about this for a moment. Then she walked over to the table, climbed onto the chair across from me, put her elbows on the table in the way that children do when they have decided to take someone seriously, and said, "Dad said you know everything about cheese." I had not laughed genuinely. Fully laughed in 5 years and 8 months. I want to be precise about that because the feeling of it was almost physical, like something that had been locked had finally been unlocked. "I know a few things," I said. "Can you make the kind with the orange rind?" she said. "I saw it on a cooking show and I asked Dad to make it and he said he didn't know how." "I can make that kind," I said. "Good," she said, and reached for the fruit bowl with the confidence of a child who had just settled an important matter. The legal process took 7 months. I won't walk through all of it because the details are dry and complicated and not the point of what I'm telling you. The short version is this. The fraudulent will was invalidated. The power of attorney was invalidated. The property returned to me, and I transferred it formally to Tyler as his inheritance, with the production facility and the land and the contracts and the reputation that 3 generations had built. I retained a small house on the east corner of the property, which is where I live now, close enough to hear the equipment running in the morning, close enough to see the maples my father planted from my kitchen window. Raymond was convicted on 4 counts of fraud and 1 count of filing a false legal document. He is serving his sentence in a federal facility in Florida. Sandra cooperated with the prosecution in exchange for a reduced charge. She is on supervised probation and has relocated to her sister's home in Georgia. The bookkeeper, who who had cooperated against me 11 years ago, cooperated again, this time against Raymond. He is not my favorite person. He is also not my problem. I have been asked by the attorney, by a journalist who wanted to write about the case, by a pastor at the church I've started attending again, whether I'm angry, whether I want something more than what the legal system provided, whether watching Raymond led away in handcuffs was satisfying. The answer is that I want my wife back, and no verdict gives me that. I want the 5 years and 8 months back, and no verdict gives me that either. I want the morning my son buried his mother with his father absent, and I cannot have it. What I have instead is this: a Tuesday morning in October, standing in the production facility with my son and my granddaughter, watching Tyler explain the aging process to Emma with the patience and precision of a man who has known this land his whole life. Emma is standing on a step stool to see into the aging cave, asking questions faster than Tyler can answer them. Her small, serious face lit up with the particular curiosity of a child who has just discovered that the world is full of things worth knowing. Tyler looks up and sees me watching from the doorway. He doesn't say anything. He just nods, the small nod of a man who is exactly where he is supposed to be. I nod back. My father built this place for moments like this one. My grandfather broke the ground for moments like this one. I spent 30 years of my life and 5 years and 8 months of my soul to arrive at this doorway on this Tuesday morning, watching my son teach my granddaughter the work that will outlast all of us. There is one more thing I want to say, because I have thought about it a great deal in the months since I came home, and I think it matters. When I was in that facility, in the early years before I learned to stop counting days, I used to ask myself what I would do differently. It is the thing you do when you have nothing but time. You rerun the tape. You look for the moment where you could have turned left instead of right and avoided everything. I spent a long time looking for that moment. I don't look for it anymore. Not because there wasn't a moment. There were probably several. I was too trusting of my brother. I was too confident that the truth would be obvious and the system would see it. I was too slow to understand that the people who love you can become the people who destroy you without any single dramatic turn, just a slow accumulation of small choices that you never see clearly until you're standing in a prison cell, reading your wife's obituary on a stranger's phone. But here is what I've learned, and I offer it to you as the only worthwhile thing that came out of those 5 years and 8 months. The land does not know what happened to you. It does not care about your conviction or your exoneration or your grief. It does not hold a grudge, and it does not offer condolences. It simply waits. And if you come back to it, if you find your way back, however long it takes, whatever it costs you, it will still be there, doing what it has always done, asking only that someone show up and pay attention. My grandfather knew that. My father knew it. I know it now in a way that I could not have known it at 56, before everything. Emma knows it too, I think, though she doesn't have words for it yet. She is 9 years old, and she is standing on a step stool in the aging cave, holding a round of washed rind cheese in both hands, and asking her father if she can take it to school for show and tell. And Tyler is telling her that cheese is not typically a show-and-tell item, and Emma is explaining, with considerable passion, that it should be. I lean against the doorframe and listen to them argue about it. Outside, the maples are burning red. I am home,